Goodhart's law says that when a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good metric. Showing a relationship between grip strength and mortality, then all the Brian Johnson and Andrew Huberman affiliates started strengthening their grips. They did not change their mortality. They broke the correlation.
At least in an emergency situation. This is an example where a relatively low-tech thing can have a bigger impact on your health than the high-tech, expensive subscription plan.
The context of who you're testing, how you're testing, all of that stuff matters versus just getting a panel of blood work.
I love data, and I've loved data for as long as I can remember. Actually, I was thinking about this. I remember as a kid, a little kid, even before I had a 10-speed bike, I had a 5-speed bike, and it had a little speedometer on there. I actually thought as a kid that I could, if I could somehow get underneath the glass or the plastic and put my finger on the needle, that by just moving the needle, the bike would go a lot faster.
Yeah.
And so,
That holding you back.
Yeah, exactly. And then I was actually thinking about it from a cycling standpoint, about when I got my first higher end road bike, I had this Shimano flight deck system. Of course, the bike computers get better. So just so many questions about data and how data can help us and how it may actually hinder us.
So I think when we start talking about data, I think one of the tendencies, especially in the modern world, is to launch out and start gathering data, right? And we have the bias that more is always better. Right? That's a cultural bias to some degree. I think there's a Western frame that more is better broadly. Supersize me, right? I don't want the small data, I want the big data. That must be better. Inherently, we assume it must be better.
Right.
Rory Sutherland has a great term that I love. He calls it measurebation, right? Are you actually tracking something that matters and will help you, or are you just measure baiting, right?
What about the idea that I don't know what data I need,
Yes.
so I want to track and capture, record all of it, so
Yes.
that later, if I need it, it's there.
Right. And if there were a way, there's actually a value in that if you could keep yourself from looking at it, right? So I actually, to some degree, try to do this in my clinic. Two of the tests that I do, I get an EKG on all my patients, and I do a bedside echocardiogram to look at their heart pumping. And I do my best to ignore the result. What I'm trying to do is, because I've worked in hospitals for a decade doing critical care medicine, and somebody comes in with chest pain and their EKG looks a little funny, and the question is, did it look funny before? And this is just this is just you? Or is this a product of the chest pain you're having now that we're seeing a change in the EKG, right? However, multiple studies have shown that getting a screening EKG leads to net harm, because you will see an abnormality, you will try to pursue it, you'll end up doing more testing, some people may get a cath or whatever, and then there's complications from any procedure you try to do. So downstream, the lack of meaningful benefit of doing a screening EKG actually leads to net harm if you were to do that for everyone.
Interesting.
So the odd optimum is to do the EKG and ignore the result, so that you have it as a record.
Okay.
To
As a
compare
baseline.
to, as a baseline,
for
but
later.
an unknown baseline is actually the optimum, right? Where if you have chest pain, now I'll look at the baseline and see whether there's
So it's
been
like
a
you
change.
put it in an envelope and you
Seal it.
file it away.
That's the similar thing, right? And so, hey, your heart is pumping a certain way. Well, what was it pumping like last year? Well, at the moment, there's a problem that becomes useful. But if I just try to overread, hey, you're feeling fine, there's no big deal. Now, is it pumping properly? Is that 50%? Is it 45%? Now we go down a whole pathway.
Well, so one question I have in that example is it almost like too late to be thinking about a baseline? Is it a better time to think about a baseline like today? Okay, well, let's go get the baseline today because this is a normal day.
Sure.
And then if we find ourselves in the ER, now that baseline is banged.
So that's the challenge, right? Is that, like, I think that, again, we have a somewhat youth-obsessed culture, right? Younger is better, and I think there's I make my case in my TRT testosterone video that that's probably not the case, right? We can talk about the details of that, but taking on faith for a moment, just to finish the thought, we have this idea that we want the 20-year-old meaning the age 20 EKG, not the EKG from my current baseline. When in fact, actually, the question is, I want a current baseline EKG, a normal EKG, as close to the moment that you start developing symptoms, so that I can tell what's what.
So,
right?
so my Apple...
There are changes in EKG as with aging, normal aging, right?
Right.
So I actually want to know, before you started having chest pain, when you felt fine, what did your EKG look like then? So there's value in getting one of these blind baselines every year on some level, unless you look at it.
So my watch, and we haven't gotten into trackers, right? I think that's something we'll get into, but my Apple Watch does do ECG. So is it a good idea then every few months when I think about it just to put
It's not the worst idea. It's actually not the worst idea. Just, again, if you hit record and don't look, baseline data you have not looked at or tried to interpret can have value. When you try to start optimizing baseline data, that's the rest of this conversation. But those are different strategies, and it's important to kind of frame that those are different. Yeah.
So on the point of framing the discussion, I think we wanted to see if we can come up with a list, and I think we have a list here, but maybe if we could start listing out what are the different types of data that are in play.
Sure.
And it's actually a pretty long list.
Sure. One is status data, and that's not the term that we use, but if you have had your gallbladder taken out, right, you now have no gallbladder, right? That's data, that's information that's important on some level, but it's permanent. That's just your status has changed. Right? So similarly, if you've had a heart attack, MI, myocardial infarction is the medical abbreviation. If you've had a stroke, cerebrovascular accident, if you've had cancer, right?
So these are top-level categorical data.
And stuff that is longitudinal, meaning that once you've had your gallbladder out, your gallbladder is out. Henceforth, right? It's important information to frame the nature of your body, but there's no rechecking. There's not. So you're not snapshotting that.
So as a physician, you have a new patient.
Yep.
It seems like these are the kinds of things you want to know, and you don't want this left out.
Yes.
And you went here even before you got to the things we normally think of, like blood pressure and things like that.
I want to know
the big rocks.
Yep. And that's why we try to get history, right? So we try to get that's the notion in medicine of taking a patient history. Is we're trying to get a list of major events.
And I'm thinking of quantitative data, like your temperature or something like that. And you could think of this is quantitative in the sense that maybe it's binary. Or low, like maybe that's 0, 1, 2.
Right. One of the things we might frame about these is these are somewhat permanent status, although you can probably nothing's completely permanent, but we'll frame it that way. Then we can have something that's kind of variable status, right? And in this category, it's a similar continuation of thought, but there's a sea change. So we might say, hey, I'm a type 2 diabetic, right? Or, I have high blood pressure, hypertension. Again, medical abbreviations, but my handwriting's bad enough, so trying to, if we write out these terms, nobody will be able to read it. So, I'm a type 2 diabetic. I have high blood pressure, right? Well, these are statuses. That's telling me something about your history, about the nature of your body, right? But number one, they can probably be adjusted. And number two, there's a question of how bad is it, right? So I'm a type 2 diabetic with an A1C, A1C is usually the thing we track. An A1C of 7 is different than a diabetic with an A1C of 10.
Or they talk about like a smoker, a 1-pack-a-day smoker, a 2-pack-a-day
Exactly
smoker.
right, exactly. And blood pressure, is your blood pressure 150 systolic or 250 systolic, right? Those are different, right? Like you said, number of packs per day. So this is kind of variable. And again, smoking, you could stop, right? Diabetes, you could lose weight and maybe it would improve or get rid of it entirely, right? The remission rate on bariatric surgery for type 2 diabetes is like 80%, right? So it's not 100%, but it can go into remission, right? So, and there are blends between these. Okay, my cancer's in remission. There's some change there, whatever. Those are different things. Medically, we have a sense to some degree that putting cancer into the permanent status category makes sense because if you have ever had cancer, your risk of cancer is higher.
Okay,
Right?
that makes sense.
So those are important data points if we're talking about types of data, right? And then we might come to something that I would call snapshot data. And that's what that's what most people think of as data, right? So we say blood work results, urine test results, vital signs like blood pressure on any given day, right? All EKG, right? Imaging like MRI or X-ray, all the tests that might be done, test results broadly fit into that category. And the test can be anything, like how long did it take you to get up out of a chair and walk 6 feet? That's a test, right? And so your 6-step walk time is a measurable test, but it's a snapshot on that day, at that moment, at that time, meaning if you just had pneumonia for the last 7 days, your 6-step walk time may be different than it will be in a week.
Okay.
Right? And so those are different types of data. I think in many ways, because this is what we think of as data, we've started filling up this category with wearables and all these other different things, and we can talk more about that. But
feeding that
we're feeding that
pipeline of data, filling it up.
Right?
And so what's interesting about this conversation, what you're saying is, I was thinking, well, there are hundreds of these. But then as you talk about it, I think, no, there are thousands if you're including 6-step walk time and all this.
There's an infinite number theoretically, or I mean, nearly infinite, I would say. Because again, you can just invent one. How many push-ups can you do? That's a data point. What's your grip strength? That's a data point. You can invent data points infinitely, right?
How many good push-ups you can do versus cheating push-ups.
And so those are all interesting data points. And part of what we see in the literature, and one of the challenges we face, is that because it is so easily available to invent a data point, then if I'm a postgrad student and I want to publish a paper because I have to get my PhD, I can invent a data point like how many push-ups can you do and how much does that correlate to mortality, right? Now I've invented a data point. Now I can do a study. Now I can publish a study. Say, oh, men who can do more than 40 push-ups have a statistically significant reduction in mortality. Men who have this grip strength have are associated, right? And so again, the other issue here is that mostly in the lay literature, we're looking for correlation. In the medical literature, we're looking for diagnostic criteria.
Meaning causation? Does that mean causation?
It means it's closely linked to causation, but it probably means something more like discovery, right? So again, traditional medicine is reactive, right? And so we're not being proactive in traditional medicine, we're being reactive.
Okay.
So we're trying to discover, are you having chest pain? Are you having a heart attack?
Okay.
Well, now I need a diagnostic criteria, which is blood work and EKG or whatever.
So when I said causation, that suggests root cause. And what you're saying is when you're in the ER, you're not so focused on root cause, you're focused on what's going on with this patient now.
Right.
Now, you work through that, you may have them in your office a couple weeks later. Now let's start getting closer to root cause, lifestyle.
And it gets a little bit semantic, in the sense that on some level, if I'm trying to discover, you're in the ER, I'm trying to discover the cause of your chest pain, right? Although, again, the lecture I always give people in the ER, it's good to put this out there. In general, hospitals and ERs are built to tell you what things are not. So if you come in with chest pain, if I say it's not a heart attack, it's not an aortic dissection, it's not pulmonary embolus, it's not, right. And we list the things that are immediately life-threatening, and we say, well, it's not any of those, bye-bye.
Right. Because you can deal with that on Monday with your regular doctor and this set of specialists
That's
behind them.
the fiction that hospitals operate under. The reality is that primary care sucks, generally speaking.
Okay.
Anyway, now we're off on a tangent. When we say causation, to some degree, the distinction I'm trying to make is we're trying to say sort of prospective causation. Prospective causation, and again, even defining that further, we're trying to say prospective causative probability. If we're really getting nuanced, meaning if you're a smoker, you are increasing in a causative fashion the probability of having a heart attack or lung cancer,
Okay.
right? It is in the causal probabilistic chain.
So we're moving from diagnosis
Right.
to prognosis,
To prediction.
prediction of what's going to happen.
What's going to happen?
With, of course, understanding it's not perfect, but
Yep.
we got to do something.
Yeah, I mean, to the degree that we can, right?
Okay.
And so then the question is, which of these data points can give us a meaningful change in causative probability, right? And that, so I mentioned grip strength before.
And we're pivoting, in this example we talked about, from ER care to longer term
Yes, correct.
health, wellness, longevity.
Yes, correct, right. And so we talked about like the grip strength idea. Hey, you measure grip strength, right? So one of the biggest issue I would say is that someone will publish a correlation study and everybody with no evidence will jump here, right? This is a separate set of studies and nobody seems to parse that, even though there are plenty of examples, right? Grip strength is actually a great one. The reason they used grip strength is because it's easy to measure. And some grad student needed to publish a paper, and he picked the easiest strength metric to measure in the population, because you can just give somebody a dynamometer, they squeeze it as hard as they can, boom, data point done.
Okay, in 30 seconds or
Yep,
something.
right.
Okay.
And he said, well, and there is literature saying that grip strength correlates to overall body strength quite well. Right? You say, okay, well, we're going to use that as a metric of overall body strength, and we are able to show a correlation with mortality. Right? Now, my favorite, I've mentioned this before, I'll keep saying it, there's Goodhart's law. And Goodhart's law says that when a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good metric. So, once this study was published showing a relationship between grip strength and mortality, then all the Brian Johnson and Andrew Huberman affiliates started massively strengthening their grips. They did not change their mortality. What they did is they broke the correlation, right? The reason the correlation existed is because it was a metric of overall body strength. If you only train this, right, then you're just breaking the correlation.
So does this apply to, for example, 10,000 steps?
Probably, yeah.
So that means if I'm at 9,000, I shouldn't worry about it?
Well, probably. I mean, the 10,000 figure was first of all invented, but yeah.
If it's
the
8 in
10,000
the
figure, I think-
evening and I'm at 9,000 steps, should I go outside and walk that 1,000 steps, or should I just say, you know what, it's time to wrap it up?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, the 10,000 figure was invented by a pedometer company.
Okay.
Right, so
Yeah.
there was never any real basis for that. Subsequent data has tried to track that up and down with varying results. You only need 7,000. No, you need 12. No, you need 15. No, you so.
And it's probably one of those U-shaped curves like you talked about before,
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
And
almost
even-
everything is.
So even if there's a benefit, it may be diminishing returns.
It is absolutely diminishing
But
returns.
walking is a healthy thing.
Sure.
We could debate the number of steps, and we should debate how much you should worry about the number of steps. But if this gets you out walking, that's helpful.
And that exactly gets us into what I would consider the core question of all of this, right? Especially the jump here, right? And the fact that if you start making behavioral changes, you have to figure out, which one am I changing? Am I changing my causative probability, stopping smoking? Or am I just breaking the correlation that existed doing the grip strength training?
Which was the issue I talked about, where if I could put my finger on that needle on the
Yeah,
speedometer.
no, exactly. There's a strong correlation between that needle and how fast you're going. But changing the needle just breaks the correlation between those two things. It doesn't actually change. That's a great example. And so that gets into, so I'm glad we framed that out. But at the core of it is the question of why, right? And why do we gather data ever in any field? What is the point of gathering data? For instance, if very common in the business world, I launch an ad, Google Ads, very famous for this, right? And I say, oh, I'm going to track the click-through rate, how many people click on the ad. I'm going to track out of all the people that click, how many of them actually buy my service. And I'm going to try and optimize these measurements, these metrics, this data.
Right.
Why? Why couldn't I just say, hey, I launched the ad and look, I'm making money or I'm not making money, right? Though even that's data. Why not
Well,
even?
you're trying to separate causality.
You're
from
trying to separate
correlation.
causality.
And,
Right?
and then I would say from a historical context, if we think of the Western tradition, if we think of science, which goes back, you think of the Greeks and the Renaissance, and if you think of the Industrial Revolution,
Yep.
both science and the Industrial Revolution, very data driven,
Sure.
right? And
I love that. Yeah.
so we've seen dividends
Yes.
from this
Yes.
quantitative numerical approach.
Totally.
And so there's a desire to apply it to everything.
Yes, exactly. And the more
especially
is better, right?
especially in areas where we haven't been able to before, but
Yes.
now we can. Now we have data that we didn't have before. This is fun.
Yeah,
These are new toys at Christmas under the
new
Christmas
toy
tree.
aspect is legitimate, right? I mean, I think that there is value, I think, frankly, just in quality of life. If you're a data-driven person and you don't buy into it too much and you keep a little bit of sanity about it, I think the fun toy aspect is actually legitimate. That if there is a causative relationship, there is essentially always a correlation, right? Like, if two things have a causal connection, then there's going to be a correlation.
There needs to be, right?
Right?
That's right.
So if there's a strong causation, meaning like I hit a billiard ball and that ball hits another ball, the correlation is going to be nearly 100%. Right? In the history of science, pre-computer, pre-data, our ability to detect correlations was not very strong. Right? It had to be a very high correlation.
Like pretty obvious.
Pretty obvious, right? And once we could detect that correlation, the inference to causation was much stronger because the degree of correlation was higher,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Now, so we end up catching low-hanging fruit, right?
Makes sense. That makes sense.
As our data processing capabilities go up, you start detecting lower and lower degrees of correlation, and pretty soon you end up in noise. Because in random data, you can find a pattern.
Right. So I had Professor Richard Waterman's statistics course
Okay, yes.
at Penn and talked about statistical significance. And if you're 95% confidence, on average, 1 out of 20 times, it's random.
You can be
but
wrong.
it's still 95% confidence.
Yep. We'll jump a little bit into blood work, right? Just briefly for a moment, right? Is that blood work, the range of normal is plus or minus 2 standard deviations. For some things we use 3 standard deviations, but basically it's plus or minus.
Okay.
Right? And that means even within the normal population, there are some people that have an abnormal blood work, right? And that's not unhealthy.
And I'm trying to remember, two standard deviations, if I recall correctly, that's 95% of the
95%.
population.
95%.
Okay.
And that's why that's actually was the origin of the significance of 95% was 2 standard deviations, right? That's why we say p-value, right?
Right.
And so, like, perfectly healthy person will have an abnormal blood test, right? Now, if you're only doing one blood test and you get an abnormal result, well, the probability that they're sick versus unsick is like pretty good, pretty 95%, right? Now, if I do 20 different blood tests,
You mean on the same
on the
person?
same person,
Just repeating, just like one after the other.
or a
something
panel. I do a panel of 20 different blood tests.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Of 20 different items.
Yep. The likelihood
okay.
of getting something abnormal is 50%, right? If I do 200 tests, the likelihood of some abnormality approaches 95%, right? That's just the way the statistics are.
Right.
That's the way we
Right.
define
Right.
it, right?
Right.
So
Right.
you see functional health is offering these, take 200, well, of course you're going to find something. You have to find it.
Right.
So
A fishing trip.
And so the notion here is that if you get enough data, you start running into this problem, right? And so big data doesn't work the same way small data does, right? If you come in with chest pain and a high heart rate and you just had surgery and you've had cancer before, right? And then I run a test called a D-dimer, and it doesn't matter what it is, right? And that's high, it's abnormal, right? Well, the likelihood that you have a blood clot in your lungs is pretty darn decent. And we have to do a CT scan, we have to start you on blood thinner. Like, I would start you on blood thinners before I even had the CT scan results,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's just such a high chance.
Right.
Right? Now, if you're a normal, healthy person with no history of anything and your D-dimer is high, it means next to nothing. Right? The context of who you're testing, how you're testing, all of that stuff matters versus just getting a panel of blood work, versus just massively collecting every possible data point you can, from EKG, from your Apple Watch, to your stress score from Whoop, to your sleep score from Aura.
So this reminds me of a time when I was giving a talk about data science. And it was a question from the audience, and the question, it was an interesting question. It was, do you have to have a strong understanding of statistics to do data science? And my immediate reaction is, of course. But then I had to think about it a little bit. And going back to a cycling example, the cycling metaphor I would say would be, do you need to know how to do bicycle repair to be a cyclist?
Sure.
And my initial reaction is, you should know how to at least change a tire.
Sure.
Because you'll probably get a flat. Oh, well, maybe you could do some data science without an understanding of statistics.
I actually like your bicycle example. I'll take your bicycle example, we'll extend it a little bit further.
Okay.
Right? Is that I think that it's fine to enjoy cycling without much knowledge of bicycle repair, because bicycle repair shops exist.
Right.
Right? And they have the expertise, and you can go to a bicycle repair shop and ask them to repair your bicycle. Now, if you go to a bicycle repair shop and you have a flat tire, and you start arguing with the bicycle repair people that no, the flat tire is not the issue. The issue with my bike is something else, right? But you have no real knowledge of bicycle repair, no deep knowledge of bicycle repair, right? That's weird, right?
Yes.
That starts to get a little odd,
Right.
because the bicycle repair person is telling, I think your issue is that you have a flat tire, and they're like, no, I have this flight data, I have some data output on my metric, and based on that, I think the real problem is not the flat tire, the real problem is something with the gear shaft. And the bicycle repair person is saying, I don't care what your data says, the issue you're having is a flat tire. Right? That's the situation we're in regard to healthcare data, is people become so convinced of their own expertise that they don't actually dive into the statistics, they don't dive into the details of how the studies are done, they don't educate themselves on what constitutes a good study, they don't figure out this correlation causation difference, right? And then they end up arguing with the bicycle repair person about why their bicycle's not going.
Right.
And now, to be totally fair to people, I do think that medical education has fallen flat. And so you end up in a really tricky situation if you go to a bicycle repair shop and they are not trained and then you don't know who to trust, because you're like, well, do you actually even know how to repair this? Or not? Right? Some shops do, some shops don't. I can't tell who's who.
And this is the blind leading the blind.
Yeah, that's the problem. And so I think a lot of doctors make this mistake all the time, right? So it's not like doctors reliably, it's not that having a medical degree reliably insulates you from these errors. If it did, if we were training doctors better and doctors took better interest in the kinds of wearable data that's coming out. But most doctors, kind of Luddite style, are not adopting AI. They're not looking into big data. They're not looking into wearables. They're not working out themselves, so they have no idea what that's like. And then they make the same mistakes. They gave a statistical question to a bunch of physicians, and they said the particular cancer, 1% of the population has it, and a scan is 90% sensitive, 90% specific, and you scan a patient with no symptoms, and the scan says they do have the cancer. What is the actual probability that they have cancer? Bayes' theorem is sufficiently complicated that I wrote an app, rxbayes.com, if anyone wants to look, to do that calculation for me, right? So I can put in the test characteristics, the pretest probability, and it'll show me the results. Once you're familiar with Bayes' theorem, I can tell you that the correct answer is probably going to be somewhere in the range of 5 to 12%, right? Now, I could run the calculation, but because I've done it enough, I know that's going to be the range, right? Most doctors said it's probably in the 90% range.
Wow.
Right? So the vast majority
so you
of
got
physicians
the wrong end of the
are phenomenally wrong, right? Most people would say, well, if I have a 90% accurate test and it says I have cancer, then I must have a 90% chance of having cancer. I think that's how most people reason. The sad thing is that the medical degree did not change that. Doctors were still reasoning the same way that the layperson would reason about how testing works.
Maybe if we could go back to the category.
Yeah.
There are lab results, which you talked about. So you can log into the EMR system. You can see all this data. Increasingly, these things are connected to each other. Increasingly, they're available to you. Increasingly, they're available to your practitioners, even across different medical groups, maybe not perfectly. But I've still seen that if I really want to know what's going on, I'm actually, in some cases, better off just keeping my own simple, stupid spreadsheet of just listing in the spreadsheet meaningful medical events or health information. So maybe if you could just say a few words about prescriptions, medicines, supplements, healthcare events, doctor visits, hospital visits. Of course, the problem with my spreadsheet is you as a practitioner don't even know how accurate or how much to trust that.
The trust problem is present in both directions. Because if you open any given medical record for any even somewhat complex patient, you will find that it will be riddled with some degree of telephone errors. Like, oh, well, the patient said that they had had their gallbladder out. The patient was misremembering and actually had their bladder operated on. But they said gallbladder, and then that got written down. And everybody's copied and pasted that information ever since. And so now that's not accurate. Then there's information that we just can't have access to. So, okay, hey, your doctor prescribed you to take some medicine, right? You had side effects, it made you dizzy, so you stopped taking it. Well, and that was 2 months ago, and you haven't been back to your doctor, so it was never updated in the there was never an opportunity to update the medical record. So the medical record says you're taking this. You took it for 3 days and stopped, and it never got looped back into the system, right? So, yeah, so the system's record is not trustworthy because events have happened that haven't looped back in, right? Patients are generally not great at keeping records. That's not blaming patients anyway, it's tough, right? But it just also the fact is the number of times where I've asked a patient, hey, have you ever had any surgeries? And they say, no, I've never had any surgeries. And I'm like, okay, well, what's this big scar on your chest? Oh, yeah, that was my open heart surgery. Okay, like.
Really?
Yeah, no, genuine.
Wow.
And not a rare occurrence, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's tough. I think it's tough in every possible direction to get an accurate sense of the history.
Well, so the data is messy, but that would be one class of data, which is basically your medical history, your prescription drug history, even supplements. Is it important to track the supplements you're taking, how much?
Yeah.
So
there's less data on what that means because they're not as rigorously studied. We're not ever sure what's in a supplement just because it says turmeric. Is there actually turmeric in it, or is there something else in it? There's a lot more unknowns, but yes, it's still important.
Okay, so you would recommend then to your patients, to your subscribers, keep a simple log.
I would. Okay, actually, that's worth going through. If you come to the ER, right, the way we teach med students is this. To get the lay of the land, so we say past medical history. This is anything you've ever been diagnosed with, cancer, heart attack, stroke, all the events, right? Anything you're taking medicine for, and this is how I ask the questions of patients, is do you have any diagnosis? Have you ever had a heart attack, stroke, cancer, thyroid problem, or anything else, right? That gets their brain thinking on that topic. And I say, okay, great. Now, is there anything you take medicine for on a regular basis, right? And often, the diabetes, high blood pressure, all of those things didn't occur to their mind at the time that I asked the previous question.
So they're taking a blood pressure medicine, but they never had a diagnosis of hypertension.
Or in their mind, like, well, again, and very reasonable on some level. As a layperson, they say, well, I don't have high blood pressure anymore because I'm taking a medicine. Right?
Okay.
So the notion of it being a diagnosis that they carry is not necessarily in their mind, right?
Okay.
So again, we learn to ask different questions to get that list to some degree. We do past surgical history, right? Have you ever had any surgeries in your life? Specifically appendix, gallbladder, tonsils, hysterectomy, those are the most common surgeries. So I list those out often because, again, gets the mind thinking, right?
Right.
Odd side effect, or odd side note, people seem to remember orthopedic surgeries more than they remember internal surgeries. And I don't know exactly why that is mentally, but everybody remembers the total knee surgery, but will forget the gallbladder. I don't know exactly why.
Wow.
Then I ask for what we call social history. And the three biggest factors there are tobacco, alcohol, this is ethanol in the medical abbreviation, and illicit drugs, right? So those are the three big ones, right? We include a couple other things, occupation here, right? Sexual activity, right? We're evaluating risk factors, broad category. You know, are you exposed to any industrial toxin, whatever, right? These will often only ask if there's a specific reason. These the first three we kind of ask everybody, right? We ask for meds. In an ideal world, what we're trying to move toward is trying to get details. So we ask the patient what they're taking. Ideal world, they have a bag, they bring in all their meds that they're currently taking.
Okay.
Getting an accurate med list is challenging, but again, if you have somebody that has a spreadsheet, I love patients that have spreadsheets. Like, if a patient comes with a spreadsheet, they're generally anal and organized, and like
Nice.
then this
Okay.
goes very fast, right? Because somebody anal enough to keep a spreadsheet usually hasn't forgotten that they had a bypass surgery.
So let me ask you this question. How many people have a spreadsheet versus how many people have a fitness tracker?
Fitness tracker much more common.
Okay, and which of those two will
In an
have a bigger
emergency, the
impact?
spreadsheet. In an emergency, the spreadsheet's a much bigger set of data.
So this
and again,
is
context matters, right?
So this is an example, at least in an emergency situation, right? There may be other situations
Sure.
which are different, but this is an example where a relatively low-tech thing that you do
Yep.
can have a bigger impact on your health than the high-tech, expensive subscription plan.
100%. Getting back into data, the dream, and I have the same dream, by the way, is the dream is for your doctor to have this.
For this to be automatic.
Yeah, for this to be automatic, for it to be tracked, for it to be available. Like, okay, one of the things I'll look at is your labs when you're in the ER, right? By the time they call me, you've got some labs, almost always, right? So I'll look and you'll say, okay, my creatinine, which is a measure of kidney function, is 1.2. Okay? Fine. That's in normal range. But if last month it was 0.3, that's a huge jump. It's not normal, right? So even though it's in the normal range, it still may be indicative of dysfunction if I have access to previous data. By contrast, for instance, we get what we call a complete blood count, CBC, and they always report like the MCHC and MCV and all these things, which are important in certain disease states, or I'm trying to make certain diagnoses. I know they can be important, but in general, they're not useful to track.
Right.
Right? But how are you supposed to know that?
Right.
Right? As a layperson, like, okay, the hemoglobin is important to track, but this isn't. You'd have to be a doctor to know which.
Well,
is which.
and this is where we started the conversation. Do you have all the data that you can ever imagine?
That's why it's challenging. There's a lot of different categories. Is there value in checking your genetics multiple times? Probably not a tracking issue. The other thing is, let's say we check your genes. What are we hoping to get out of that? Right? I think a lot of what people are trying to assess the notion of risk. Right?
And then also, isn't there the notion people say, well, you may be dealt bad genes right,
Sure.
for certain disease conditions?
Totally. The next question is, what am I going to do with the risk? Let's say I tell you, oh, you're high risk. What are you going to do? Right? Oh, you're low risk.
So my understanding is that some disease categories are actionable. There are actionable things, like for example, diabetes. Not maybe every form of diabetes, but there are things you can do to reduce your risk of diabetes. And then there are other things that, that at least historically, like say Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, where the traditional conventional wisdom has been there's nothing you can do. You're going to either get it or you're not, but it's not actionable.
Sure.
I know there's some recent discussion, maybe it is, but
So let's take diabetes, right? What are the things you can do to reduce your risk of diabetes? Right? Keep a healthy weight.
exercise, nutrition.
Right? Maybe nutrition, although that probably is mostly weight control.
And then would you, in the context of analytics, would you say measuring your A1C?
Sure. So for a general person, I think the most you could do would be every year.
Okay.
Right? That's the recommendation anyway. Right? You should probably be doing these things anyway. Weight control, exercise, nutrition. You should probably be doing those things anyway, whether this is high or low.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So everything that you would get out of this, you should be doing anyway. Right? Therefore, this has no value. Because whether it's high or low, you should be doing these things. Unless, in some way, you're using this as a weird form of motivation. Right? Is that you know you should be doing these things, but somehow if a genetic test tells you that you're at risk, then you're going to go do it? Maybe.
Whereas otherwise you wouldn't, right, okay.
maybe, but I think everybody knows they should be doing these things. I don't think...
Well, this gets to the list you made before, right? Last time you made a list.
We did VO2, strength, social connectedness, smoking status, and blood pressure.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is we should be thinking of these 5. I think what I'm hearing you say is that for most of the things that we go down this pathway, if we're focused on this, we're going to be in a pretty good place. And if we're not focused on this, don't worry about this, you have bigger problems.
Yes, correct. Let's dive into sleep and analyze that. And then we can kind of get a lay of the land of how these things work and why there are questions. One of the things that's talked about a lot is the notion of sleep and longevity. Now, I think we can say this is only correlation, right? No one has done a randomized controlled trial where they somehow fooled people into thinking they're sleeping when they weren't, and it was completely random, and like this is a very difficult trial to do, right?
And I would think for something like longevity, you would need to do that for a long time for it to move the needle.
Exactly right. So this is a correlation-based concept, right? And that is exactly where the Bradford Hill criteria come in. Bradford Hill criteria are relevant when you cannot meaningfully do a randomized control trial and you're trying to figure out if there's causation.
Okay.
Right? So it is the alternate pathway to causation.
It's a way to infer causation.
To infer causation.
When you can't prove it.
You can't prove it.
Okay.
Yep. And so they came up with it on the basis of figuring out whether smoking actually caused lung cancer or not. Right?
So this was like in the 50s, 60s?
Correct. It's one of the reasons we also got smoking right. Right? Smoking does meaningfully cause cancer. We have tested that subsequently by doing a population scale intervention where we convinced people that it caused cancer, they stopped smoking, and we saw a drop in lung cancer.
Okay.
Right? So, but we wouldn't have been able to do the intervention if we weren't convinced of the causation.
But it was still nice to get that confirmation.
It was nice to
anyway.
get the confirmation out of after the fact.
And the benefit, of course.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
This list needs to become a part of the lexicon for anyone interested in their health. I think that if we could get this list into the public consciousness, we would massively improve everybody's ability to repair their bikes, right? This is the tire change ability.
Well, and that's where my mind is going. This is huge implications for health, but this could have huge implications for business, for technology, for all kinds of categories.
Temporal is, does cause come before effect, right? Meaning that, like, okay, hey, you got in a car wreck and then 2 days later you inhaled something. Yeah, exactly. They correlate very well, but the temporal thing doesn't match, right? The insurance claim couldn't cause the car accident because they're in the wrong temporal order. Is this consistent with and similar to other studies? Meaning, are there other studies, other than just the one you're looking at, saying a similar thing, right? Is it dose dependent, meaning, hey, the more you smoke, the more lung cancer?
What builds the case for dose dependence is if you have multiple data points, each data point has statistical significance, and if the curve connecting them is rational.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be linear.
No. It's difficult to explain a curve like this, right?
The roller coaster curve.
That's weird, right? Now, if it looks like this, yes, maybe that's true, right? If it looks like this, maybe that's true. Right?
And it maybe gets a little bit to this last item too, right? So I guess you look at these in context
together,
of each
in context
other.
with each other. That's the whole point of it,
Okay.
right? Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Intervention, this is where randomized control trials come in. This is probably the number one. This is probably technically number two. Right?
Okay, so in your smoking example, it was after the fact.
After the fact.
Because you really couldn't
How do you
realistically
do a
it
randomized
before.
control trial?
Okay.
Yep. Study quality, right? You can do a placebo-controlled trial, but I only did 3 people. Well, right?
Study quality also gets to reproducibility. Can somebody else follow your protocol and get similar results?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into study quality, so I don't want to go too far down that. Angles, meaning, hey, does secondhand smoke also increase the risk cancer? That's a different angle on the same question, right? If I find people that work in factories, but nobody in that factory smokes, but then in this factory, a lot of people smoke, that's a different angle on it. Is it the factory or is it the smoke, right? So having multiple lines of evidence toward this theory, right? And then biological rationale. And this one, the reason this is so important is because 95% of health influencer information is this. Right? We have massively overemphasized the importance of this to the exclusion of all the other criteria. Right? If I can tell you a story about how this molecule affects that receptor, and then that receptor causes this, and then this is biological rationale. Right?
Okay, so it's a good story.
It's a great story.
But we need a way to separate fact from fiction, and that's where these other things come in.
And when we, similar to the previous one, when we knew less about biology, we couldn't tell as complex of a story, and so finding any story was a better indicator of causation than it is now.
So I thought you were going to go the other way. I thought what you were going to say is if you have these things but you don't have a story, you're not done yet. But you inverted it. You said if you have a story and you don't have those things, then you're in fiction land.
Mostly because that's where we are now.
That's the problem we're facing. There are a lot of stories.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And then have you seen situations where these other things line up, we don't understand the biology,
absolutely.
and then later, eventually, we understand the biology?
Absolutely. I mean, so many drugs, we actually don't know the mechanism of action. How does valproic acid reduce migraines? I can tell you some story about sodium channel receptors, but the story breaks down, okay, it interrupts sodium channel, and then I don't know, magic, right?
Okay.
And that's the other thing, is that things we know work, often we don't have a biological rationale for, or we discover it later, to your point, right? We don't really know how Tylenol works. Not really, right? Yeah.
If that works, you just open the bottle, you take 3 tablets.
Yeah, exactly. Often we can get intervention data with a big strong effect without knowing what the biological rationale is.
So part of what you're implying is you don't need to necessarily run the table.
No, it's
peg the meter on each of these indicators for us to go. I mean, you do the best you can, but it gives you a sense of how strong the case is.
Correct.
It gives you a multidimensional view, which is less likely to be skewed. And it also gives you a framework to work on in the future as new information comes online.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And look, despite all the, the smoking companies' efforts, there was never any high-quality study published that showed that smoking was anything other than harmful. There wasn't even a neutral study. There were smaller effect studies that, okay, maybe it's not that harmful, but there was never, this one showed it was okay, and this one showed it was beneficial, and this one showed it was negative. They all showed negative. They were very consistent in that regard. The size of the strength of the effect varied by study, but it all clustered on one side of the equation, right?
So it's interesting. I mean, just probably a whole other talk about studies.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah,
because
that's a whole other
because
talk.
every day we hear a news report of a new study.
Sure.
And it seems like one part of us wants to say, okay, here's the new data, I'm going to run with it because I'm trying to maximize, optimize.
Sure.
And then another part of us is like, okay, I'm skeptical of all studies. I don't trust any of them. And it sounds like both are maybe extreme reactions, and we need to figure out, at the end of the day, as a layperson, how to navigate all of this new information that's coming out.
And one of the ways to, again, I think you can simplify this list in many ways with 1, 2, and 3, right? 1, 2, 3. Yes, it's a long list. I'm not saying the others don't matter, but this one has fooled us, and we need to start letting it go, okay? This one can allow us to detect smaller effects, right? So if you look at the correlation between blood pressure and mortality, it's a pretty big effect. If I do a randomized control trial where I give people medicine to lower their blood pressure, the effect size is something like 115%. In order to detect that small of a difference, I have to have this tool in my arsenal, right? So if someone is claiming, hey, eating dark chocolate is associated with a 15% increased risk, 15% is not even close to good enough, right? You need 100% increase, 200% increase for correlation to even be on the table, right? Unless you have, so if you have randomized control data, you can work with smaller effects.
So I think I've heard, you can tell me if this is right. Are we obsessing on little tiny things?
Yes.
While also missing elephants in the room?
Yes, that's exactly it. That's why my list of those 5 things, that's the message I want to get out. is because that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what this storytelling process has led us to, is because I can tell you a cool story, something that sounds sciencey and involves receptors and chemicals and molecules and whatever.
I'm being a little bit cynical here, but I'm thinking of the economic drivers. Is part of it here that when you have a story, I can now sell you a pill or a powder. And if I convince you of the story, then I can sell you this thing. And for you as a consumer, it's actually easier to buy a pill or a powder than it is to increase your VO2 max.
Our brains are storytelling engines. That's the core.
We're trying to make sense of the world.
We're trying to make sense of the world, right? That gets into why I emphasize meaning. That's why that is such a big part of my practice, is meaning is fundamentally linked to the narrative order of our lives. That's one of the key aspects of meaning, right? And so we are built to pay attention to stories. That is being hijacked by storytelling media online because we're not as motivated by statistics. Statistics do not, if I tell you that 20% of the world's bird population is going to die, you have less of an emotional impact than if I show you one dying bird. The story of this bird dying and its pain and its suffering and that catches us. Right. And so that's just how we're built.
That makes sense.
And the problem is that we need to deal with statistical realities, but our brains are built for stories.
Interesting.
Right.
We're going to talk about sleep.
Sure.
In the context of Bradford Hill.
So we have the language now, and we say, okay, we have this correlation, and now we say, okay, are there any intervention studies? No, there's no intervention studies. You can't do a randomized control trial.
And by sleep, I'm thinking sleep quality, sleep duration.
Sure. Neither of those can we do a randomized control trial. Okay, so then we go to number 2. How strong is the effect? And it's not super strong. The lowest mortality is at around 7.5 hours of sleep, right? The shorter sleep, let's say down to 3 hours, there's some increase, right? And up to 9 hours or 10 hours of sleep, there's a huge increase in mortality. If you just took these studies at face value, you would say, well, it's better to sleep too little than too much. If you can't hit perfect.
Because of this check mark shape to it.
Yep, yeah.
Okay.
And so you don't have a huge strength of effect. You do have a dose dependence. So this part of it is on point.
Meaning because the curve exists.
The curve exists.
And presumably this curve is statistically significant.
Yes, correct. And it's not rolling.
Okay.
Right. So, study quality. How these studies were done by the sophisticated mechanism of asking, hey dude, how much did you sleep last week on average? That was the methodology.
They weren't even looking at sleep trackers because they didn't exist.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. This is completely subjective survey
Just asking
data.
adults.
Asking adults.
Because infants sleep
at a snapshot point in time.
Right, okay.
No, adults of all ages, but which also adds noise to the data. So the quality of the studies is relatively low overall, meaning they're not done with sleep trackers and data and time, all these different factors. So that's not there. So consistency and similarity. Actually, there are plenty of studies that don't show that, right? There are negative studies on sleep. Specifically, this curve does not seem to exist for women with short sleep. For women, the curve looks like that. Right?
So this is the general population, this is women, or this is men and this is women?
Everybody, this is
general
women.
population. Okay.
Right? People who exercise doesn't seem to.
A different curve?
Different curve, right? Doesn't seem to matter if they get short sleep. Short sleep exercise mitigates the effects of short sleep. Right? So this now is the general population. This is women. This is people who exercise. Wait a minute. We're not seeing a super consistent effect here. Right? So now we're not getting this criteria. And so now, cause and effect, again, if you're talking about longevity, everything comes before death. So I guess technically you do have, since you're measuring death, which I guess is the final event, right? So out of these, you have temporal association, you have dose dependence, and right now where we're at, I think you can get a biological rationale for anything.
So I'm thinking of Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep.
I will put a link in the description below. There's a great article showing all the errors just in the first chapter of that book. He quotes studies that don't exist. That's an example of the hype cycle ignoring study quality. If you actually look at the quality of the studies, you actually look at the citations, all of a sudden, wait, that's not what that study says.
So then what does this mean in terms of you're in your career, let's say you're in your late 20s, early 30s, you have some hardcore job, you work all day, you come home, take care of the kiddos, put them to bed, you work again, it's 1 in the morning, you're tired, you want to go to bed, but the report's not done.
Yep.
At that point, you're probably not thinking longevity, but there is an immediate trade-off in the moment of you're tired, you want to get
Sure.
rest, but you also are ambitious.
Sure.
Anything you can say in that context, is it better to say, at some point, go to bed? Or is it, if you can push through it, more power to you? Where would you land on that?
That's getting into the River Rock methodology once again. And all these conversations tend to converge onto that conversation, which is why I came up with it. Anytime we have these conversations, we're going to end up converging there. That's why I created it, right? Is how ambitious? Why? For what? Because if you're not ambitious, you're not going to be able to pull your family out of poverty. Yeah, you know what? You probably better get to work, right? Oh, you're ambitious because you want to turn 100 million into 150 million? Go to bed, honestly. Really, right? Oh, you're ambitious because you're on the edge of discovering something amazing. Your company's researching cancer and this could be the breakthrough. Yeah, don't sleep. Figure that out.
Interesting.
Right? So the meaning of what you're doing affects my answer to that question.
That makes sense.
And that's individual to the person to some degree, not just society. I picked examples where maybe people would resonate in general, but if you're an Olympic athlete and it's not a report, but it's an extra training session, but you're just driven by that notion, then maybe you should go to that training session.
So we need to understand that.
Sure.
That side of it, right? Because sometimes, especially for an athlete, doesn't your body need rest to be able to
And
recover
similarly,
and rebuild?
for my researcher example, hey, would he have more likely to make the breakthrough if he rested? Maybe. There's other, meaning you can approach the optimization, but you're approaching it from a different angle. You're no longer saying, I'm optimizing my sleep for sleep.
Which
I'm
is
optimizing sleep for this purpose.
And so we talked about sleep duration, but there's also sleep quality.
Sure. This is an interesting question, right? Because as we talked about in a previous discussion, the subjective effect always has a subjective aspect, right?
Sure.
And so, hey, I'm getting along with my spouse and I'm doing really well and my job is going well and whatever, and I slept 2 hours and I feel great, right? Or, oh, I'm depressed and nothing's really going right and I can't focus and I'm anxious and I slept 2 hours and I'm just exhausted.
So it may be part of a larger context.
Absolutely. Any subjective experience in many ways is linked to the global context, and you can't really separate those. Anxiety increases pain.
That makes sense.
We know that. If you're super anxious, you experience pain more sensitively.
So since today's focus is on data and analytics, and we had a great conversation about sleep generally,
Sure.
can you say a few words, your thoughts on sleep tracking, sleep trackers, sleep records? I know, for example, for myself, my Apple Watch will do sleep tracking, but it's kind of bulky, and I found I didn't sleep as well wearing this thing.
Yeah.
Right? So I just leave it on the charger. I had the Whoop for a while. I no longer have that. So so it sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, there may be generally an over-obsession on sleep duration,
Sure.
which then suggests putting a lot of energy to track that may not be the best use of your energy compared to, for example, your other list, which is no longer up here, calculating your VO2 max.
Sure. So here's where it gets interesting, right? Is what if in the process of optimizing the duration, right, you actually de-optimize your subjective experience because you become more anxious about it? Or you're wearing a watch that reduces the sleep that you get. Right? So the intervention itself it's almost this Heisenberg uncertainty kind of. The intervention affects the output.
I talked to one person who told me that got a Whoop, started tracking sleep, the factors that affect sleep. Number one factor that was flagged for them, alcohol.
Okay.
Based on that, they've significantly cut back on alcohol.
Okay.
Is that a success story? Or is that maybe the exception that proves the rule with what you're saying? Or is that maybe the wrong way to think about it?
I think that's a success story. I think that's the value of sleep tracking at its best. Yeah, I think that using the trackers for hypothesis generation. If he used the Whoop to generate the idea, maybe I should cut back on alcohol. He cut back on alcohol and the subjective sense of sleep improved, that's a success story. He was able to, by any means, placebo or not, any intervention is a combination of real effect and placebo, and we don't know which one was the effective here, but it doesn't matter because his subjective sense of sleep, it was improved, right?
So
now, if he still feels like shit, but his duration of sleep has gone up, you've missed the mark.